Good afternoon, all, and thank you so much for coming back and joining us on the Spring in Nature Black Employees Network speaker series. I'm delighted to say that we are joined here today by Celeste Warren. Celeste, how are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm doing fine. Thank you for the invitation.
You're more than welcome. I've been so pumped to have this conversation with you. I think, to be honest with you, this is probably one of the most relevant conversations we're going to be having within the speaker series. Obviously, on the series, we speak to so many different professionals within the area of STEM, but I'm really excited to get into the conversation with you because of your job and your role currently within your workplace. So if I can just jump in to the first question, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Could you tell our viewers where you work, what your role is, and what your responsibilities are currently?
I work at Merck, which is a pharmaceutical company. It's based in New Jersey in the United States, but it is a global company in over 120 different countries. Outside of the US, we're known as MSD, Merck Sharp and Dohme, but in the US, we're known as Merck. I currently lead Merck's Global Diversity and Inclusion Center of Excellence. And so I have been charged with developing the company's strategy around diversity, inclusion, and equity, and working with our leaders, our managers, our employees in driving that strategy through the organization.
Amazing. I mean, I think we could probably talk for a good couple of hours, especially about the kind of work that you do and the role, being a pharma company. And obviously, I like the part where it's at the center of excellence in terms of diversity inclusion. I love that. So I can imagine that more recently, maybe, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, we've seen in the headlines and in the professional arena that diversity and inclusion has been a big buzzword. Let's say more so since summer 2020, with the murder of George Floyd and various other Black individuals, and coming into different areas of society. There's been a lot of tension, let's just say, and I have noticed in my field, obviously STEM also, that there has been what it seems to be like a reawakening of people that are not of color, kind of sitting back and going, hold on a minute, like, yes, this isn't new, yes, this isn't unheard of, but something needs to be done. Could you explain to me how that worked with you? Because obviously you're in the mix of it, you're in the heart of diversity inclusion, obviously not just for Black people, obviously, but for all different areas of diversity. Could you tell me how it unfolded with you, what needed to happen, and how things kind of unfolded?
Well, yeah, it was. You can imagine, as a Black person yourself, how the country was feeling. And everyone asked me, well, what was different? Because there have been instances like this for decades, for some would argue, arguably centuries, right?
Mm.
And I think it's just a convergence of a lot of different things. In the US, the environment was very divisive from the standpoint of politics and various different issues that were surfacing especially over the last 4 years. We had the growth of the next generation coming into the workplace, a generation with very strong ideals and beliefs and values. I think there was a lot of things that were happening in the United States at that time and around the globe when it comes to equity, and not just equity from a race standpoint, but equity from a gender, from an LGBTQ, all different aspects of diversity. And when this event happened, it was a symbol of the police officer kneeling on the neck of George Floyd, staring into the camera of the young woman who filmed it. And actually, there were a lot of people that had filmed it, but for 8 long minutes, just staring and looking and saying, I dare you to do something. And, from that perspective, the oppression, the feeling of inadequacy, the feeling of just lack of power at that moment was just so overwhelming. And then afterwards, in that 8 minutes, something just happened. It happened not just the horrible death of George Floyd, but an awakening in people around how could this happen in 2020? How could this happen? And I think that that's kind of what the awakening was about. It was like Black lives were so undervalued that this man basically looked into the camera while he was killing this Black man and had no remorse whatsoever. Even had one hand in the pocket. Um, and so that's what I think was the whole just overwhelming just feeling of how can this happen, and not just in the Black community but across all communities all over the globe, where it was everyone, for whatever reason, whether it was London or Iraq, Iran, Switzerland, wherever they were around the world, they could relate. The people could relate because they said, you know what, I'm feeling inadequate. I'm feeling like I'm not valued. And look at this. And so they joined hands in solidarity with the Black community in the United States to say, we're not going to stand for it. Black lives do matter. And so I think from that perspective, um, not just because it was filmed, but I think the filming of it really just showed how far this world has come when it comes to inequity of African Americans. And then on top of that, we were all at home. So there was a period of quietness where you had to look at it, where you were forced to look at it because there wasn't this hustle and bustle of the daily routine that we saw, in 2019 and prior to the pandemic. And so there was this hush and everyone was focused to look at it. And at that point in time, when you are in this period of quiet and you're looking at it, and then all of a sudden there's a self-reflection. What have I done? What have I contributed? How have I contributed to this race feeling the way that they do? So there was a lot of, I think, self-reflection because we had time to do that. And I think that all of that culminating with this period in this moment.
Absolutely. And I think it what you said just there resonates so much, because I remember it was like a time of stillness and quiet. It was, I think a lot of parents, Black and white, were trying to shield their kids from that awful imagery, and it would just seep into your timeline, or it would just, you would turn on your telly and maybe go to watch a film, and then there'll be a quick, news clip of it, and it was just like you couldn't shield your kids if you wanted to. You couldn't avoid it if you wanted to. It was there. It was in your face. It was the first time this had happened, and things like this do happen in the UK. And I think some people do, because obviously the United States is so much bigger, obviously, and it's a leading country, isn't it? So a lot of countries do kind of mimic and follow, and we're a lot smaller in comparison. We don't have police officers that walk around with guns. We don't have that here. Only if you're like real special, terror squads or something like that. But
Mm-hmm.
we do have Black people that have been arrested and been taken to jail and have not come out. And it is a lot of the time it goes under the radar, but when it is picked up and gone, and and in the news, it's a trending topic. It will kind of rear its ugly head. We will talk about it for a couple of weeks, and then it will just kind of just disappear. With this, it feels like, look, we're February 2021. We're still talking about it. And I can't remember, and please let me know if you can, I can't remember a time where something like this has happened, because remember, there's been so many of these situations that have happened since George Floyd. Um, and I think I've never known a time where the conversation is still continuing and people are still wanting to have this conversation. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's a good opportunity to have these conversations, really, and especially with different types of the industry. I want to kind of jump back to you for a second, and then we'll circle back on this conversation, because obviously it does kind of underpin the communication that we're having today. But in regards to you, now we just spoke about your role, the profession, where you are. I've been stalking your LinkedIn. I've been Googling you. I've got images. I've seen talks that you've done. So I feel quite strongly versed in my stalker nature when it comes to finding out about you. So I know quite a bit. But I think it's really important for our viewers to get a real picture of the kinds of things that you're responsible for within such a huge organization as Merck. People that may be outside the kind of pharmaceutical space may not understand the gravity of how big Merck is and what a big player is in pharma. So could you give us a little bit of a breakdown for people that don't know Merck and what you're responsible for, but also at the same time, after giving us that, could you give me like the three most gratifying things that you've accomplished within your career? And also, and if that obviously stems into what you've done with Merck, then yeah, please let us know. I want people to get a real understanding.
Well, I try not to think about all of those things at the same time, because it can get overwhelming a bit. But very simply, when I think about Merck and MSD and how we approach diversity and inclusion, it's fundamental. It's fundamental to our organization. It's one of our basic values and standards around diversity, inclusion, and equity. And it has to be, in order for it to be fundamental and foundational, it has to be sort of woven into the organization. And it's basically through, we look at it through four areas. One is at the very basics, the foundational element, strengthening our foundational element, which is very, very importantly, we have to make sure that our employee base mirrors the diversity of our patient base, because we're not going to be able to fulfill our mission of saving and improving lives of our patients if our employees don't reflect that diversity. Because all of us in various different communities all around the globe have certain challenges that we face when it comes to achieving health outcomes. And so in order for us to bridge those gaps, it's very important that we have a diverse employee base that can bring that authentic self to work, bring their authentic selves to work. So they're able to not just talk about what they do from a functional standpoint. I'm a scientist, I'm an engineer, I'm a salesperson, I'm a marketing person, but also bringing their experience and their culture and their background. So they can say, well, I'm also, for example, I'm a Black woman, and we know that certain diseases hit our community, have adverse impacts. So I'm able to bring my skills, my functional skills, but also my experiences to try to bridge that gap. So that's at the foundational element. The second piece is you want a diverse workforce, but you got to make sure that you're maximizing the diversity in your workforce. So you got to create an inclusive environment around your employees, so they're able to feel energized, they're able to feel empowered, they're just able to do what we want them to do. That becomes really important. And how you approach that is through, you got to build inclusive leaders, inclusive people managers, inclusive employees. And so everyone has a stake in creating that inclusive culture that we want surrounding our employees. The third piece is, we're not a non-profit, we're a for-profit organization. And so we have to look at our business and integrate D&I into our business so we can be adding value to our business performance. And we do that through how are we integrating D&I into our commercialization process strategies, our marketing strategies, making sure that we have diversity in our clinical trials. Those are just some examples of how you have to weave it into the organization, because I do believe that at that intersection of diversity and inclusion and business performance, you do create a competitive advantage for the company, especially in the pharma field. in STEM related fields where we have to have a close link to patients in order
Absolutely.
to be successful. And
Mm.
then the last piece is it's not enough that we're just doing things inside our own four walls and feeling all good about what we're doing inside, but we have to look outside of our four walls and look at look at the organization, look at the culture, the business landscape, and say, how are we contributing to it just being a better world? And besides our mission and our vision of saving and improving lives for people, we also have to look at inequities that we see within different cultures from a health equity standpoint, for example, and try to bridge those gaps between the haves and the have-nots. Economic inclusion is really, really important as well. So those are just a few of the things that we do in the area of diversity, inclusion, and equity within Merck. And as I said, it can seem daunting at times, and sometimes people will say, well, you know, Celeste, are you trying to boil the ocean? And I always tell them, no, I'm not trying to boil the ocean, but I'm just asking you to take yourself and boil 3 or 4 people around you. And then those 3 or 4 people need to boil 3 or 4 people around them. And then who knows, at some time we will have boiled the ocean, but we got to take it in sort of chunks of, and just really break it down so we're really approaching it from a pragmatic standpoint.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it does sound like a very well-oiled machine, to be honest with you. Such a big outfit like Merck, I can imagine there's so many different areas to the business because as you mentioned, obviously there's marketing, there's sales, and obviously there's, you know, there's so many different, obviously you've got the labs, you've got the research, the clinicians, and so on and so forth. And it's yeah, as you say, making sure that there is representation everywhere. Obviously in STEM, I work obviously in STEM also, and you can see that there's pockets within the industry that are the overarching for me in terms
Mhm.
of the latest stats that we're seeing is, you know, Black people are not really featured in certain areas,
Yeah.
some areas not at all. You know, various different reasons for that. I'm sure that's a whole nother conversation, a whole nother interview really. But I think yeah, you're right. Kind of looking into how what the possibilities are in terms of reaching those goals, I suppose. But what about you? What about you, Celeste? I want to know about you. What I
Well,
mean, you know,
you asked the
what's your
question about
accomplishment?
accomplishments and what do I feel
Yeah.
good about? Yeah. Um, well, I think for me, it's when the light bulb goes off on people who may not have been thinking about diversity and inclusion in their daily lives. I think people know, you know, as you said, it's 2021 now, especially with the year that we had last year. People understand um, very generally, I think, around diversity, around inclusion,
Mm,
and culture, and all the things that we're trying to do. But they don't. I don't think they know. Well, what can I do? And for me, one of the greatest satisfactions that I get is when that light bulb goes off and you can see it, and you see
mm,
someone saying, oh, well, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to really contribute here, because we need people to not just be feeling a certain way, we need people to be actioning and doing things
absolutely.
and really
Absolutely.
helping us to drive D&I across not just our organization, but other organizations as well. And sometimes people don't know what they need to do. And I love having those conversations where I'm talking to someone and sort of opening up their eyes around what they could be doing. And then, you know, just for me, seeing them go out and become so passionate about it,
Yeah.
and talking with their peers and their colleagues or their managers or their leaders,
Mm,
and just saying, you know what, I'm going to be an ambassador. I'm going to be an ambassador for change. And that really, I love seeing it. I love seeing people who are inspired because of what we are able to do, because we can't do it alone. We absolutely can't do it alone. Um, I also, you know, you want to get to a point. Both of my parents have passed away, and so, you know, I have 2 children that are, one's 19, the other is 17. And you want and my husband, and you want them to feel proud about what mom does. So that's really important to me as well, and being a role model for my children, and so they can see success, so they can see opportunities where, you know, my parents and my grandparents maybe didn't see those opportunities because of the time that it was. But I want to make sure that my children and that generation, they have opportunities, and they're not sort of taken back or held back because of the color of their skin or their gender or what sexual orientation they are or what faith they are. But we want them to be able to succeed, and that gives me purpose in my life.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it's so important. Representation is everything, isn't it? It really, really is. That kind of falls on to my next question. Obviously, with you being in the career of DEI, when you first started your profession in this area, what did it look like in comparison? So basically, what was your experience with diversity inclusion coming up in the industry in comparison to you obviously leading the charge within the industry? What do those two look like, and are they miles apart?
You know, it's interesting. I grew up with a father who was the first Black teacher in the area, in the region. He was the first Black principal, and first Black in the superintendent ranks. And for me, seeing the world through his eyes and through my mom's eyes, who was there to support him, um, it was always a part of me, because I saw, you know, his struggles. I saw his successes, but I saw all of that firsthand, and I saw how it impacted him as a Black man, and the things that he had to do, and the frustrations, and like I said, and the joys as well. And he was a man of faith, and so, you know, he was able to really fight through with a level of discipline that I hope, you know, that I can instill in my children as well. But it was always sort of a part of me, and so when I started working, I was first, my first career was I was a reporter, and I was one of the first Black female sports writers and sports reporters in a lot of different areas. And so there was a lot of similarities from that perspective. And then when I went back to graduate school and got into human resources, um, my my job, I always did it through a lens of diversity and inclusion. I was always looking at it from the standpoint of equity, and how are we making sure that we have a diverse team? How are we making sure that I'm counseling leaders so they can meet people where they are and apply situational leadership, so they're able to really inspire their employees? Because I fundamentally believe about the shadow of a leader, and the impact that that leader has on their organization. And so it's always been a part of me, but it was at a scale where whoever I was supporting from an HR perspective. And that was just a segment of the company, whatever company I was with, but it was a segment. My client group was a segment of the company. It wasn't large scale. And so as I got different jobs of increasing responsibility, that seeing things through that lens of D&I followed. And so, you know, as the organization I supported got larger, then I was able to, again, coaching and counseling leaders, instilling my learnings around diversity and inclusion into that organization that I was supporting. And then fast forward to, you know, having this role of leading diversity and inclusion across the enterprise. I approached it from the standpoint of change management. So you understand kind of, you do the inventory and assessment of where the organization is and where you want it to be, and then putting those plans in place to get there. And it's not an easy path. You know, you take 3 steps forward and then there'll be some missteps, and it's not a linear path, and it has to be parallel paths because you have to be working on numerous things to be able to do it. But we're talking about organizational change. In this case, it's organizational change from the perspective of diversity and inclusion. And so there is a methodology around organizational change. And so that's basically it. Here's your current state, here's your future state, putting those plans in place. And then part of that change management is also my personal journey. When I first got into this role, I wasn't an expert in the field. I was a novice. And even now, it's funny when you say I Googled you and I did this and I did that. I still don't consider myself an expert in the field. I have so much to learn. And if I lose that hunger for learning about different cultures, there are so many different cultures across the globe. It's impossible for one person to know everything about every culture. We're always going to be in a learning stance. But that's the fun of it, learning, because when you don't learn, you're stagnant, and I don't like being stagnant. I don't like status quo. I think we should always be journeying and pushing towards something. And in my case, it's pushing toward an organization and a world where people want to live in and they feel proud to live in. And there's so many things I think that can really make us feel like there's not progress, or we have such a long way to go and such a strong fight that we have to keep fighting. But there's also some great things that have happened too. When you look at the tragedy of George Floyd as an example, looking around the globe and the response of people around the globe, different countries locking arms and standing in solidarity, that was a beautiful thing. Absolutely. I keep thinking about George Floyd's young daughter saying that her daddy changed the world, right? And that to me is it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And so I think there are lots of opportunities. We have a lot of work to do. Absolutely. But I'm charged with, and I believe my purpose is to affect and impact change. And until I leave this earth, that's what I'm going to be doing.
Oh, brilliant. No, yeah, definitely. I agree with you. Things really did, after the murder of George Floyd, things really did just changed pretty quickly. And I'm hoping that's just the beginning. And as you say, there's so much more to do, so much more to do. I've got something else for you. You've spoken about obviously there's so much things to do. We know kind of the end game. We know what we want to accomplish, and we need to do it for all. What things would you like to change? So obviously, in terms of your role, obviously there's so many different things that you're able to do. You're in that point of your career when you can admit change and you can do different things to help various different areas of DEI. But in terms of industry-wide, what things would you like to see change? So, for instance, in some areas of academia, I don't really see much change when it comes to kind of amplifying Black voices. I don't really see much happening. I see a lot of people talking about trying to get us to a place where there's change, but sometimes it feels like the change can be a little bit slow on the uptake. But I do understand there's various different protocols that need to be put in place, and I'm sure we will get there. But from a standpoint outside of your remit, what things would you like to see change within the industry for the betterment of the next generation of Black people in your career?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm impatient for change. Yeah. I would like to see people of all different dimensions of diversity in all levels of the organizations across the globe. We're still seeing that, we're in the minority. We're still seeing that in some cases, in some organizations, we're the only. And you know, you can put we and substitute that for any dimension of diversity that you might see. We don't see a lot of women of color, for example. We don't see a lot of persons with disabilities. We don't see a lot of openly LGBTQ community of individuals. There's so many, there's such opportunity for us to diversify the upper echelons of organizations. And that to me can't happen fast enough. I think though, that I'm very optimistic about it because this generation, Generation Y, Generation Z, are the most diverse generations that we've seen in history. And so I know that's going to happen. It's going to happen through just the fact as these young people get older and they start going into these positions. What I hope and I pray is that there's not a lot of frustration where they leave the Fortune 500s, the Fortune 1000 companies. And while I applaud entrepreneurship, and I'm cheering them on as they go and they start their own companies, and I think it's wonderful. But I also too want to see them step into the corporate ranks, and I want to see them rise up the ranks. And I know it's going to happen, but we have to stop looking at these opportunities like in a pie, where it's a win-lose game, right? And I don't want us to be looking like that. I want us to look at it from the standpoint of there are multiple opportunities, and it is not a pie with finite resources, but it is it's like a pie chart, and not a pie chart, a bar chart. And everybody has opportunities. There are limitless opportunities. And so I want to see a day where the Fortune 500 doesn't have just 20% female CEOs or 5% CEOs of color, or even less CEOs who are in the LGBTQ community, or of different face, or whatever, or with disabilities. But it's normal. That's what I want to see. I want to see that representation rise up at the upper echelons of the organizations. I still want to see us getting our own companies and being our own CEOs and driving what really gives us passion. But I also don't want us to give up on the fact that we need them in those Fortune 500, those Fortune 1000 companies, and don't give up. Just don't give up.
Absolutely, and that leads on perfectly to my next question. What advice would you give? Like, what would you say would be, you've been there, you've done it, you've done amazingly well with where you've come. Can you give maybe 3 to 5 different kind of points of advice that you'd like to give over to our readers and viewers?
I think there's 3 things, and I like to tell this especially to my colleagues. One is you have to stay relevant. So you have to basically make sure that you are staying on top of your field, whatever your field might be, whatever your discipline might be, and not so much looking at it as to what people need today, but what do they need tomorrow, 5 years out, 10 years out, what skills, what capabilities. So staying relevant. People always ask me, well, what books do you read? And full confession and transparency, I like articles. I like those 5, 6, 7, 8 page articles that really cut to the point and really get after, here's what's happening. Because these articles, they're very, very relevant, and they're discussions around what's happening now, or what the future trends might be. I read some books, but I read for entertainment. So I would say for all of our folks, stay relevant. Always make sure that you're keeping your skills up to date. You want to be the one who, when leaders are behind closed doors and they're talking about that next assignment, that next job, that next role, you want to be the one that they're talking about.
Absolutely.
And hey, if your company doesn't pay for it, go and invest in yourself. Don't put yourself in a situation where you have to rely on somebody else to get what you need. So stay relevant. Second thing is stay supportive. We have to support each other. We have to make sure that we're wrapping our arms around each other and supporting each other. That is really, really important. And so making sure that when you're in a meeting and you see that someone has brought up a point and it's just sort of flopped and dropped and nobody's paid any attention to it. And then 15, 20 minutes later, somebody else says it and they are like, oh, that's a great idea. You know, we hear about those situations all the time. Well, be an advocate for that person in a subtle way. You don't have to pound your fist on the table, on the desk, but you be an advocate for that person, supportive for that person, whether that be in the meeting or after the meeting, whatever it might be. But we need to be supportive of each other, inspiring each other. That becomes really, really important, especially on those dark days, those days of frustration, those days when you're not feeling like you're being valued. I can't tell you how many times those supportive words, a text, just a quick email, how they just make me feel so uplifted and inspired to keep on going and doing what you're doing, because you never know. A quick text to someone, you never know where they're at, what they're feeling at that given point in time. But if they're on your mind, just give them a quick text and say, hey, you know what? That was great. The thing that you said the other day, it really inspired me. Keep at it. I know you're such an inspiration. But just being able to send a quick message of encouragement to someone is really, really important. And then the last thing I think is, and I kind of hit on this in earlier, stay in the fight. Don't give up. You're going to have frustrating days. You're going to have days where everything's not going to go your way. You're going to get bad news. But stay in the fight, because if you're not going to stay in it for yourself, stay in it for the others, all the others of those that are coming after you, those that you're laying that path for. But you got to stay in the fight. You got to stay in there. I think those are the three things that I would say to future generations and to others.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. I think that is so important, to the stay in the fight part. That really does resonate, because you hear so often when you know, I've heard so many stories of Black graduates, or you know, people of color trying to get into a certain field, and you know, it just, for various different reasons, it has been really difficult. And it's just, sometimes it's just been, look, maybe this just really isn't for me, because the amount of hurdles they have had to jump over in order to get to be seen. So that, yeah, that's a great one, actually. Well, I might even quote you on that. Stay in the fight. Celeste Warren. I love that. I've got one last question for you, and it could be multifaceted, really. I think I'm going to merge the two, actually. Do you have any role models that have inspired your career? Feel free to shout them out. Absolutely fine. And also, if you did have any, what kind of impact did they have? I can imagine what the answer is, but yeah, feel free.
I think the person who most inspired me and still does is my parents. I mean, I have to say that, like, I saw firsthand from my father and my mother of what it means being Black in a certain period of time, and having to have to struggle and work hard to be able to get as far as he did. There's a story that I tell. When he graduated from college, he had a degree in education in English. And when he was hired, his first job as a teacher, he was hired as the gym teacher. And yeah, and in a school where there was no gymnasium. And so he, as I said, he was the first Black teacher. It was all white school. And when he had to teach, he taught in the parking lot of the school. And as he was teaching, the parents of the students would come up and drive their cars, and they'd park in the parking lot, and they'd sit there and they'd stare and they'd watch my dad teaching their kids. And you know, when he would tell me the story, I would just get irate. And he told me this, I think I was in college the first time he told me the story. And I said, well, how did you deal with that? And he said, you know, he goes, I did my job. I taught the kids. You know, it was, yes, it was physical education, but I taught them, and I taught them well. And one by one, those cars stopped coming. And so the parents began to develop a trust in me. And then, you know, he went on to be an English teacher and a principal, et cetera. But it's struggles like that, that hearing firsthand and then being able to see it and see the type of person that he was, and how it, you know, how it strengthened him, even though it may have hurt, but it strengthened him to be a man of discipline, and a man that he was. And so for me, that every time I come in face to face with an obstacle, I do my job. And as much as it may hurt me, as much as it may frustrate me, as much as it may drive the white knuckles at the end of I still do my job, because, as I said, I'm doing it not just for me, but I'm doing it for those thousands and tens of thousands who haven't found the courage yet to raise their voice. And so I have to raise my voice for them, and do it in a way that is helpful, that is going to be received in a way of which it is intended, which is very, very important. But I think, so for me, it's my parents. And then, you know, of course, there are certain people through the course of history, Martin Luther King Jr., of course, and Madam C.J. Walker, the first, you know, Black female millionaire, and the things and struggles that she had to go through to build her empire. George Washington Carver, what ingenuity, you know, to take and do all of those things with a peanut.
Literally,
you know, it's just, when you think of just all of these innovative, creative, wonderful people throughout history, I think, you know, that have just done some really wonderful things. That there's a lot of people that I could say that I really, really respect. But I think, you know, at the top of the list are my parents.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, that is amazing. Thank you so much. I can't believe I've come to the end of my questions. I could literally speak to you all day. There's so many nuggets in what has been brought out today, and I really do thank you for spending it. I know you're so busy, for being able to spend time with us, speaking to us today. It's just so important to have so many different voices within the industry. And again, thank you so much for your contribution to the Springer Nature Black Employees Network Speaker Series. I'm definitely going to be keeping in touch. I will definitely be coming back to you. But again, thank you so much. And if you have any lasting words that you would want to just to say before we wrap up the floor.
Well, I just, Marlene, thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to talk with you and chat with you about diversity, inclusion, and equity. And I just hope that there's one little nugget that people can take and move forward and help us in this area. We could use all the help we can get. So, like I said, stay in the fight.
Absolutely. Thank you again so much. I really, really do appreciate it. That's it today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Stay tuned for our next edition. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.